Welcome to this Dungeons & Dragons campaign set in the world of Eberron. I'm Frederick, and I'll be your GM for this session. This video is designed to give you all the information you'll need to join and participate in the campaign. Let's start with the basics. We're going to be using only one software program to play the game. It's called The Forge, and it's completely free to join. Once I have your email, I'll be sending you an invite. After you click on the link, you'll be redirected to the Forge website. If you already have an account, you can log in. If you do not, please sign up for one. Once you log into the Forge and open the game, you'll be presented with a layout something like this. On the left-hand side are all of the controls for what your character can do. Things like moving and targeting and measuring distance and lighting a torch are all here. On the right-hand side are the controls used for texting messages to myself and the other players, and controls for rolling dice and visualizations for combat and dice rolls. It also contains your audio settings. On the bottom of the screen are your voice command controls. Note that we're not using any video while playing. It already takes a whole lot of computing power just to display everything on this virtual game table and manage the background audio and the voice communication. So we're not going to be adding any more internet bandwidth by using video. I'll be pre-generating all the characters for this game, which means that you don't have to create any of them yourself. They're all first level characters, as this campaign starts at the first level and moves all the way up to the 20th level. Your characters will gain 1 level per session, and if you want to change something about your character or switch it entirely after this first session, that's okay, but for now, I've got it covered. One last thing before we move on. It's important that we all have a safe and fun time gaming at this virtual table. So, let's all speak and act as if our mother, father, or grandparent were at the table with us. Some cursing is okay if it's mild and infrequent, but let's save any potentially racist, political, or religious discussions for other mediums like the Twitter, the Facebook, or the TikTok. If there's ever an issue that makes you feel uncomfortable, please feel free to stop the game or send me a text message in the game. And now, the World of Eberron. I think that the best way to describe this setting is by using analogies to our world, Earth, and comparing it to the World of Eberron. For instance, we have fuel-powered airplanes. Eberron has elemental-powered airships. We have electric trains. Eberron has lightning trains. In fact, the best way to think of Eberron is to take our Earth history between the years of around 1900 and 1920 and to pretend that instead of science, we found magic instead. And all of the inventions and creations we had during that era were kind of the same, except that they were created and powered by magic. And of course, there was an infamously widespread and brutal war, which also corresponds to what happened in the world of Eberron. So at this point you might be thinking, hey GM, how about guns and rifles and cannons? Those were around in the early 1900s. Does the world of Eberron have those too? Well, the answer is yes, but. Yes, earth guns and rifles and cannons are absolutely present in the world of Eberron, but they're in the form of rods and staves and giant tree trunk cannons that fire magical powered missiles that aren't quite as cheap to make as firearms and artillery here on Earth. And it's for that reason why medieval and Renaissance weapons like crossbows and swords and armor still exist in the world of Eberron. Because paying 25 gold for a crossbow and some bolts is way, way cheaper than paying 100 plus gold for a magical rod that may be more accurate, but has a far shorter range. So if we're going to draw a proper analogy from Earth to Eberron, here's what it might look like. Take 1 part Lord of the Rings for the magic and medieval setting, add in 1 part Indiana Jones for the pulp action and adventure, season with just a pinch of Call of Cthulhu for the turn of the century mystery and supernatural, mix vigorously, and serve chilled. Now that you know the what of Eberron, let's look at the who and the where. If we're starting way at the very beginning, we need to look at how the world was created. The overly abridged version of creation was that there were 3 immortal progenitor dragons who were one with the universe before there was a world of Eberron. One dragon became the planet, Another became the heavens and the stars, and the last dragon became the underworld. You can think of this story as an analogy to the creation of the earth in Genesis. The reason why this is so important is because your characters will encounter references to this creation story during their travels. The creation story is known simply as the prophecy. Once Eberron was created, there were a number of beings who inhabited the world. Some humanoid, some demonic, some completely unrecognizable. But historically, the first peoples were goblins, hobgoblins, and bugbears. Note that this differs greatly from many of the much more familiar role-playing settings, which feature humans or dwarves or elves as the first inhabitants of the world. Not so in Eberron. Fast forward many years, and Eberron is populated by a whole bunch more races. In fact, if you can find it in the Dungeons & Dragons Player's Guide, or any numbers of the setting books, it's probably a race in Eberron. At the time in history when this campaign takes place, humans and dwarves and elves are in fact the most common, and the goblins are in the minority at this point. There are a few races that are unique to the world of Eberron. The first is the Changeling. They have the natural ability to change their appearance at will. Next is the Shifter. They have the ability to change into a more bestial form of themselves at will. Think of movie werewolves, but just partial movie werewolves, not the full thing. Finally, there's the Warforged. They're made from steel and wood and magic, and we'll get to them more in just a bit. You and your fellow players live on the continent of Corvair. The best analogy to this is Europe, where all of the countries lie adjacent to each other's borders. At one point, Corvair was peaceful. It had a single ruler, and that ruler had 5 children, and it was understood that after the ruler passed on, his eldest would inherit the throne and preside over all of the other nation-states. Unfortunately, that's not what happened when he actually died. All of a sudden, some of his children didn't want to fall in line with the eldest. They split into 5 distinct nation-states, and then some of those nation-states fractured within, creating more nation-states. There were disputes and failed negotiations, and then there was a period of Cold War, and then an actual all-out war. The war lasted for many years and many generations, and as necessity is the mother of invention, the people of Corvair made some significant changes to their world during this time. The first is the creation of a magical occupation called the Artificer. The Artificer is a cross between a wizard, an engineer, and a mad scientist. They're responsible for many of the wartime inventions both on and off the battlefield. Remember that Warforged race? Yep, that's an invention of the Artificer. Same with those gun-like magic-powered rods and staves and cannons. Some nations even created entire undead armies to fight for them in the war. And they all sent their best weapons and armies into battle and fought each other until something happened that instantaneously ended the war. Something horrific and something awful. The city-state of Ciri disappeared from the continent of Corvair. Within the mere span of a few hours, all that remained were ruins, desolation, and a thick black fog all along its borders that billowed and swirled from the earth all the way up into the heavens. This event, where Ciri disappeared, is known as the Morning. Sometimes that fog makes horrid, face-like shapes, other times it churns aimlessly. The Morning, basically, is Eberron's version of our Chernobyl. Upon hearing of the destruction of Ciri, the nation-states and the 4 remaining offspring stopped fighting. A treaty was signed, and the remaining city-states agreed upon borders and leaders. The Warforged that served in the armies were given all of the rights and freedoms of other members of society at this point. And in the setting we're starting in, and in the time we're starting in, it's been 2 years since the war ended, and Ciri remains an uninhabitable wasteland with a new name, the Mournland. And that brings us to you, the players. All of you live in the small, simple town of Salvation. This tiny refuge is the very last stop on the way into the Mournland. Why would anyone choose to go into the Mournland? salvage. The Mournland is Corvair's largest cursed treasure chest. If you can survive the wastelands long enough to survive in the ruins, you can return to Salvation and sell your haul for a really, really good price. Maybe good enough so that you can retire and never enter the Mournland again. Or maybe it's just enough to replenish your spent supplies and try your luck again. Each of your characters is an orphan. Maybe your parents ventured into the Mournland looking for salvage and never came back. Maybe you were one of the last ones to make it out of Ciri before the morning. Maybe the world's just a cruel place and this is where you ended up. The orphanage is run by both the town cleric and the local schoolteacher. Together, they've seen you through your childhood and early adolescence, and you're almost old enough now to get by on your own. Until now, there's been no reason to leave the orphanage. You've got food and clothing and a roof over your head. At least, there was a roof over your head until last night.